for the Consolidated Funding Application process. The application opened on February 5th, and today we're going over details of the request for proposal document, some details on the submission process and requirements, and the application will be open until March 15th. That's a Friday. A few housekeeping items today. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the MOHS webpage for the CFA 2025 process, either later today or tomorrow. All attendees, as you've noticed, are currently muted. There will be a section at the end of today's presentation to ask questions. You can also raise your hand if you have a question throughout the presentation, or feel free to type it in the chat. There's also, if there's any project-specific questions or about your agency or application, you can email hspapplications@baltimorecity.gov. We will maintain a collection of questions and answers on a Google Doc that is also posted on the MOHS website, should you want to reference that. Okay, so today we'll be doing a brief overview of the CFA process, talking about the eligibility requirements for submitting an application. We'll go through the project types that in which we are soliciting applications. We'll talk about the review and selection process, and then have time for questions and answers. Okay. So a brief overview of the CFA, and I know many of you are from agencies who have applied for CFA funding and received it in the past, so this might be very familiar. The CFA is a streamlined request for application process that receives and vets applications in a variety of project types. All projects, though, are dedicated towards serving individuals and families who are currently experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness, and or living with HIV/AIDS. The projects are funded by one or multiple sources, but we request one application for each project, even if in the past or the current cycle you've received multiple funding sources for that one project. The CFA is hosted by the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services. We are a recipient of federal, state, and local funding. We'll speak briefly about the different funding types that are included in the CFA process. The mission of the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services, in collaboration with the Continuum of Care, is to make homelessness in Baltimore City rare, brief, and non-recurring. And we do work very closely with the Journey Home, or the Continuum of Care, in Baltimore City. The COC is comprised of local stakeholders and organizations that coordinate resources and carry out responsibilities in line with the Department of Housing and Urban Development Continuum of Care program. The COC board and leadership is directed by a variety of groups, provider agencies, people with lived experience of homelessness, and other community leaders in Baltimore City. Our work aligns with the Baltimore City's action plan on ending homelessness with 5 strategies. First, to increase the supply of affordable housing in the city, to create a more effective homeless response system, to transform the shelter system, to improve access to economic and employment opportunities, and to establish a race equity agenda. One, reduce the length of time people experience homelessness, to increase exits to permanent housing, and to reduce returns to homelessness. So we are particularly seeking new and renewal projects that align with these, one or more of these funding priorities. The CFA includes multiple funding sources. So there are 6 included in the process this year. First is the Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG. On the right, this is the anticipated funding amount. Please note that this is an anticipated amount. It's just an estimate until we receive final confirmation. This is a funding source through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and MOHS works with our local Department of Housing and Community Development as part of the Consolidated Action Plan to plan for and implement ESG services and programming in the city. The second is through the state of Maryland. It's the Homelessness Solutions Program. It is now just HSP. It used to be HSP and HSP Youth. So if you are a recipient of the former HSP Youth funding, this has changed. The Department of Social Services, or DSS, this is a Baltimore-based funding source locally. Housing opportunities for persons with AIDS or HIV, this is HOPWA. This is also through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Department of Health State Special Funds, this is through the state, and locally Baltimore City General Funds. A brief overview of the CFA application timeline. So February 5th, the request for proposal and information was released on the website. Today, February 14th, we are hosting the Bidders Conference webinar, which will be posted. The application, all applications for all project types are due March 15th at 5 p.m. EST via Neighborly. Please note this is a new process for the CFA. Last year, we received all application materials via email. We are not receiving any applications via email this year. All submissions need to occur through the Neighborly platform. You may already be familiar with Neighborly through the Continuum of Care application process over the summer, or if you've applied recently for funding through DHCD, there's a few city agencies that now use Neighborly as the application portal. We highly encourage you to make an account and access Neighborly well before the deadline. All of the application questions are included in there, and there are fields for individual uploads of each of the required elements. Please log in sooner rather than later and reach out to us with questions well before the deadline. In April, after funding decisions are determined in collaboration with the Resource Allocation Committee of the COC, we will issue the conditional awards, and all projects need to be set to start on July 1st. This is in line with the city fiscal year. Okay. 10 minutes. Okay, so some information about the eligibility for applicants. At a minimum, all agencies need to have nonprofit 501c3 status. You have to be a tax-exempt organization or another city agency. You must be in good standing with the state of Maryland. This certification of good standing can be obtained through the Department of Taxation website, and it must be within 30 days of the application submission. We require 2 years of audits or financial reports. This is in accordance with 2 CFR Part 200. We ask that you have a SAM registration and UEI number. And as I mentioned, all projects need to have a start date of July 1st. Application requirements. So all applications need to be submitted in Neighborly and be thorough and complete. All recipients of funding through the CFA do need to be registered as COC members. If you have questions about COC membership, you can certainly reach out to the HSP applications at baltimorecity.gov email address. There's also sign-up information for COC membership included in the request for proposal document on the website. We encourage all renewal and new applicants to thoroughly review the request for proposal document in detail before submitting an application. This year, we're also including a lobbying certification. This is a requirement for all applicants to certify and describe your or to certify the prohibition of lobbying for publicly funded agencies. HMIS participation, which we'll speak a bit about later. We're asking for a list of the board of directors and staff listing for people involved in the project, policies and procedures, and certification of completion or screenshot of the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act. The link to that is also included in the RFP. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Ms. Michelle Owens-Good, for this section.
You. Eligibility, financial health, and compliance. Audits and accountant prepare financial statements. Within the statements, it should include findings, case flow review, and lines of credit. For renewal projects, we are requesting any information regarding de-obligation of funds, invoice submission, and monitoring findings. Insurance coverage requirements. Proof of insurance coverage for professional liability errors and omissions, workers' compensation, general commercial liability, business automobile liability, fidelity coverage, and cyber liability. Housing principles. As many of you may know, MOHS and our entire COC, we operate from the housing first approach. There's a prohibition on screening and terminating clients for income, substance use, criminal record, domestic violence, service participation, or progress. We also fully apply to and align with the Fair Housing Act and the City of Baltimore. For full text of this information, please see the CFA application package. Faith-based services. No discrimination in employment or service provisions on basis of religion is allowable. No requirements for clients to participate in religious activities or services. Again, full text of this information is outlined in the CFA application package.
Thank you, Ms. Michelle. For all applications and funded projects within Baltimore City, we do require the utilization of coordinated access and entry. These are two separate but related processes. It's a centralized, standardized process for referrals to shelter and housing. So coordinated access is a centralized process to access permanent housing placements, and entry is for shelter and transitional housing programs, so short-term sheltering programs. All permanent housing programs must receive their referrals through coordinated access. The intention here is to allow participants and clients to access the system one time and then get matched to the appropriate housing or resource rather than applying to a multitude of projects separately. And the use of this centralized system is required for all participating projects. And there's staff and a team here that at MOHS that manage and triage applications through coordinated access that support projects throughout the city. HMIS is a centralized client database for information on service delivery and client demographics. This is also required for all grantees in order to be able to aggregate, analyze, and digest data across city programs and assess for quality and performance management. There are a variety of projects that are eligible for applications through the CFA. We'll go into detail on each of those projects here. We ask that your proposed project fit into one of these established project types. If you're seeking funding for multiple projects, you must submit distinct applications for each. So please review the RFP document closely and identify which of these areas is most closely aligned with the project you're proposing, and that you meet eligibility for at least one of the grant sources. Please note that the last two, so the support services for permanent supportive housing and transitional housing, due to the nature of how these are funded through the CFA, we're only accepting renewal applications for these two project types. For all others, so 1 through 5, we're accepting renewal applications or new applications. So street outreach, there's a variety of different services and activities that are eligible as part of street outreach. Engagement, so this can include initial assessments of needs and eligibility. Street outreach is particularly focused on individuals who are living in a place not meant for human habitation. Engagement can also include provision of information and referrals to programs and services. Case management can include use of the coordinated entry or access systems, verifying client eligibility documentation or connecting to documentation, coordination services and support in accessing benefits, and any sort of monitoring and follow-up on participant progress. Services can include emergency health services that address urgent needs, mental health services such as crisis counseling, transportation to connect to services within the city, and services to special population. There's also a possibility of funding to support special activities such as the point-in-time count. For emergency shelter, funding can support shelter operations. Please note that within this emergency shelter category, day shelter or drop-in centers are also included, as well as transitional housing programs. Funding can be used for essential services, food and water, transportation, as well as vouchers for hotels or motels. Emergency shelters are required to participate in coordinated entry and must meet certain criteria. So first is the emergency shelter must be low barrier to entry. They must focus on exiting participants to permanent housing. The family shelter designation is for any shelter that accepts children, is included in this designation, and therefore must accept all family compositions, regardless of the sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or age of any members of the family. This is in accordance to COMAR, which is a prohibition on involuntarily separating families. The program must follow standard operating policies and procedures and work with MOHS to ensure that the policies and procedures meet the minimum requirements of the funding source. Must be adherence to minimum standards for safety, sanitation, and privacy, and meet the habitability checklist and lead-based paint screening for the facility. For rapid rehousing, this is viewed as a permanent housing, although not permanent supportive housing intervention that includes housing identification, rental and financial assistance, case management and support services, and a focusing on increasing income. So the programs should designate housing identification staff to recruit landlords who are willing to rent to participants in the program. The rental and financial assistance component includes up to 24 months of rental assistance. Funding can be used for moving costs, rental application fees, security deposits, last month rent, utility deposit, and utility payments. The intention of rapid rehousing is for projects to use a progressive engagement model to determine the length and amount of rental assistance for each household. This should be described clearly in the application. This, coupled with support services, here the focus is to ensure that clients and participants in rapid rehousing can exit the program after 24 months or less and be able to succeed and live independently. For housing stabilization and homelessness prevention, this is a time-limited assistance and supportive service the goal is to prevent a need to move into emergency shelter. The target here is to prevent individuals or families from moving into an emergency shelter or unhoused situation or another place described in paragraph 1 of the homeless definition. This is elaborated in more depth in the request for proposal document on the website. The goal here is to help individuals and their families regain stability in their current housing or other permanent housing by connecting them to services and support. This is intended to have clients regain stability and have programming that can connect clients to services and support. Households must meet the criteria under the at-risk of homelessness status or homeless status, lack the resources to obtain permanent housing, and have an annual income that does not exceed 30% AMI. The 3 components here include an initial assessment. So this is meant to be conducted at enrollment to evaluate the household's need, to focus on helping households navigate barriers and to build a support system within their community. And then rental and financial assistance to include short and medium term rental assistance or payments for rental arrears. With all this, the housing stability case management is meant to support clients in stabilizing their situation in their current living environment. For HAPWA, I will pass to my colleague, Deandra.
Thanks, Camille. Our housing and services for people with HIV and AIDS, we want all projects aligned with the National HIV/AIDS strategy. The priorities, of course, are to reduce new HIV infections, increase access to care and improve health outcomes, reduce HIV-related disparities and health inequities, and to achieve a more coordinated national response to the HIV epidemic. Components that will fund short-term rent, mortgage, and utility assistance. Of course, keep in mind when you're requesting these funds that they cannot exceed 52 weeks in any given year. Services provision, support services, such as case management, preferably housing case management, permanent housing placement. These resources are used to help individuals get into housing, such as payment of utility bills, old utility bills, or a security deposit to help them get into housing. Of course, some of the security deposits are doubled of late, so this would be a great benefit to individuals trying to get into housing.
Moving on to projects that include support services for permanent supportive housing. Again, this is for renewal applications only. This is a focus on case management services that accompany permanent supportive housing programs. These services are able to link residents to supportive services such as job training, healthcare, budgeting, parent skills, treatment, etc. So if you are a current recipient of a supportive services for permanent supportive housing project, you may apply for renewal. Unfortunately, new applications will not be received in this category. Transitional housing is another project type that is only available for renewal applicants. Transitional housing is designed to meet more intensive service needs to increase housing stability with a length of stay between 90 days to 2 years. And there's a focus here on case management and supportive services with a focus on special populations such as veterans, individuals who are surviving domestic violence or fleeing from domestic violence, or unaccompanied youth. Okay, I'll speak a bit about the review and selection process of CFA application. So some of the submission requirements, in addition to what we've already shared, cannot emphasize enough that all items must be submitted to the Neighborly portal. I'll share a screenshot of that in a moment to show what the interface looks like. We are not accepting applications via email or those that come in after 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Friday, March 15th. All of the applications, as opposed to being in a Word document, are now in Neighborly. The application also requires an upload of a project budget workbook. Each project type has a project workbook. These are available for download on the MOHS website or in the Neighborly portal. You will need to download the Excel workbook, fill out all cells, and then upload it to the Neighborly portal. Because we are accepting one application for each project type, even if you implement multiple projects, you can only upload one project budget workbook, and the project type must match the application that you're submitting. So for example, if you are submitting a project for street outreach, the project type in Neighborly must be indicated as outreach. The budget workbook also must be for outreach. We do not need separate budget workbooks for separate funding types. This particularly really only applies to renewal projects. So if your agency is currently implementing a project that receives funding from multiple sources, we still ask that you complete one project workbook that describes the budget of the entire project. We ask for the budget that there's a budget narrative section included in the appropriate cell. Here, there needs to be a clear description of each proposed eligible expense, a detail of personnel costs, if applicable, staff role, and qualifications. All items must be uploaded, including the budget as well as the supporting documents and forms in line with the checklist in the RFP and on Neighborly. We request that if you're uploading documents, if you can use some sort of standardized naming convention just to make sure that all of your application components are kept together. So for example, agency, project name, and item. So MOHS, emergency shelter, org chart, for example. The review of the proposals or applications includes a multi-step process. So first, we're just looking for application completedness in Neighborly. The system is designed to help you with this because most items are required in line with the application requirements. There's also some forms that need to be completed and signed off on at the end of the application. So the person who is submitting the application in Neighborly should be a designated certifying official at your agency who can sign and who can sign off on the final forms and accuracy of the application. Following the check for completedness, we will conduct a threshold review. So a threshold review looks at the eligibility of the project type in line with the application questions and funding source, and does a brief assessment on the financial health risk of the project. We look here at the review of the last 2 years of the financial health statements or audits. If the project passes step 1 and 2 here, then they are moved to project scoring, which I'll get into in one moment. You can see here that this is the Neighborly, just a screenshot of the Neighborly portal. The link is on the MOHS website, and you will land on this landing page. You can either sign in if you have an existing account or register as a new participant. On the landing page, you can see that there's an opportunity to start a new application. This is the Consolidated Funding Application there with the deadline of March 15th, and you can start an application by clicking on this blue box. You can ignore the Continuum of Care or COC RFP. This was open during the summer and is usually on a summer cycle, but only the Consolidated Funding Application or CFA is available at this moment. The step 3 here, if you pass initial completedness and threshold, is project scoring and assessment. If you want to see exactly what elements we are looking at, you can see the full list in the request for proposal document. The scoring focuses on the project intent and scope as described in the narrative questions, the approach and previous agency performance, that's also described in certain sections of the application, the budget, so looking at feasibility, alignment of the budget with the intent of the project and application, the project design, the overall quality of the proposal, and then for renewal projects, we're also looking at project compliance, so previous compliance and adherence to requirements from last year, or from the last full year of funding, and then performance outcomes. We'll also be looking at underspending in the previous year to see utilization of the previous award. So that is it for our formal presentation. We have left a lot of time for questions. You can certainly raise your hand or type a question in the chat, and me and my colleagues will try to answer as best as possible. If you want to ask a program-specific or project-specific question, I will add the email is right here, hspapplications@baltimorecity.gov. And if you are hopping off, then thank you for joining us for the CFA Bidders Conference. And if you'd like to be unmuted, you can, for those who are on the Teams app, there's a top bar with a hand icon that says raise. And if you press that or type in the chat, we will unmute you for your question. There's no questions. That is certainly fine too, but we'll stay on. Oh, I see Lori is typing. We'll stay on for a few moments. Okay. We are currently receiving supportive services for permanent supportive housing grants. Is there an opportunity to increase this grant for current recipients? Good question, Lori. So I think you're asking about a requested increase in funding. You can certainly submit an application to request additional funding. We are not certain that the funding will be available to increase current awards, but encourage you to apply in line with your program needs. Thanks for your question. And I will say for anyone who is planning on submitting a renewal application, you can certainly request a different funding amount, either an increase or decrease to the award that you're currently receiving. The CFA is a very competitive process, and we always receive more requests for funding than we have funding to accommodate. So certainly no guarantees that we can accommodate any increase in your request for increase, but encourage you to do so for all project types. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you very much for joining us. We'll share the recording shortly, and any questions that we receive via email, we'll update the shared Google Doc, which is available and linked on the MOHS website. Thank you very much for joining, and we hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.